Okay, now for our interview with Lawrence Reed. I was going to ask you whether it's Lawrence or Larry, but I saw a big Larry sign on my screen, so I'm going to assume Larry.
Yeah, that's fine. I use Lawrence in the byline for the book
Okay.
and in articles, but please call me Larry.
You're a big Michigan guy, I see.
Yeah, 30 years in Michigan. I live in Georgia now.
Uh-huh. You probably know Lou Dodak
Oh
and
my gosh, yeah.
Rick Johnson.
Yeah, both members of the legislature. Rick was speaker for a time.
Right. Was that in the kind of the years you were there?
Yeah. I think, let's see, I left in 2010. Rick Johnson, I think, might have been speaker right when I left or the immediately preceding one.
So they went into business together.
Oh, I have not followed them since I left Michigan. So
okay. Yeah. So they had, I don't know if they still have it or not, a lobby firm. So my company worked with them quite a bit because we were trying to do business with the Michigan Lottery.
Okay.
And they were helping. But two great guys. And Rick was really one of the first elected or formerly elected officials to support Trump. He came out. Trump's coming down the elevator and Rick Johnson's out there.
Oh my God.
Supporting Trump. And I gave him a rash of shit about it at the time. I'm like, you're crazy. This ain't ever going to happen. And sure enough, he deserves to have been Secretary of State, basically, based on his support for Trump very early on. But Johnson had his finger on the pulse of something.
Yeah. Not many people saw that coming. I didn't. There were many times during that campaign when I thought Trump was a goner, but it didn't happen that way.
Yeah, he plays an asymmetrical political game that's very hard to keep up with. He had all 18 of those guys on the stage not knowing what the hell to do. You got Rubio trying to join his game, and then he got smashed for that. I guess Cruz came the closest, right? But I say that Cruz would have been as hated as Trump was, I think. In fact, frankly, any of those guys, because the left just goes, ape. People forget how much Reagan was hated.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and he was a likable guy.
Right.
Cruz is not a very likable guy from the get-go, unfortunately.
Yeah. Trump, unfortunately, I have to acknowledge to the other side that I get it. There's reasons, there's legitimate reasons not to like the guy. And, I think it's too bad that he's got those elements to him, because I think he shot himself in the foot as far as that election. I think it was very winnable.
Yeah. I think in the end it was his personality. Obviously, people were not opposed to his policies by and large, at least the majority wasn't, because they gave the Republicans 13 extra seats. And, here in Georgia, I think we lost those 2 Senate seats because of the way Trump behaved, not so much his policies.
Well, yeah, I think the Georgia Senate seats for sure. I think he had 2 issues going on. One is his obsession with, the stolen election. And then the other is, remember, he did this weird reversal and suddenly was advocating for the $2,000 a person thing. It was almost like a desperation move by him to get people on his side and say, of course, it should be 2,000. But that divided Republicans. Republicans weren't supporting $2,000 checks.
Yeah, that was very problematic. And what a shame. We should have won those.
Yeah, he for sure is not a genuine conservative or a genuine free market thinker. You being of that ilk, I'm sure you would probably agree that Trump probably wasn't your favorite president.
No, but he turned out to be a lot better than I expected. I went to that with very low expectations, but whether it be court appointments or so many things, he pleasantly surprised me. So, but not the best. Yeah, it's hard to beat Reagan.
Yeah. Well, Trump, I think, was Reagan-esque as far as his willingness to go against the grain and to address issues that, were verboten to bring up before. So, Trump's probably a narcissist, but his narcissism played to his advantage in many ways. The fact that he could take the slings and arrows that he took and just keep forging ahead, he did not care.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, you need somebody with Reagan would have been too much of a nice guy these times.
And Trump does have some instincts that it's just hard to know where they come from sometimes. But this whole Meghan Markle and Harry scandal that's going on, did you see that they showed Trump from a year ago saying that this Meghan Markle, I wish Harry well. I wouldn't want to do, there's big issues there. All I can say is I wish them well.
So he called it. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
He absolutely called. Yeah, he's got a line into information that the rest of us don't seem to have. So I don't know. Before we move on to the subject at hand, do you have a favorite candidate yet for 4 years from now?
I really don't. I mean, the last time around, although he left early, Rand Paul was my first choice. I don't know if he's going to run again, but I don't know.
I like Rand Paul that he can reach across the aisle. There's some things he's going to say that both sides are going to agree with. Just not being a down the road Republican.
Yeah.
Then you got DeSantis in Florida.
Yeah, I kind of like him. He's been a terrific governor.
Yeah, I think pandemic is still going to be on everybody's mind in 4 years, and the people who handled it well are going to have an advantage. So if it proves out that he handled it well, I think he's going to have a big advantage.
Yeah, and I think on the Democrat side, I would guess that both Cuomo and Newsom are not going to be factors.
Not looking good for either one of them.
No. Right
now. I'm here in California, and I'm biding my time, waiting for things to reopen. What I've been saying, because I'm no Newsom fan, clearly, but I say if he responds to this campaign and he reopens swiftly, I'm going to vote for him. Or I'm not going to vote to take him out of office, because I want to give him some incentive to respond to this and give him a chance to correct this and get things opened up and follow Texas and Florida.
Oh, you're a generous spirit, Jim.
That's how badly I want things to open, though. I mean, it drives me nuts. I just spent a month in Miami because Miami's open and LA's not.
Okay.
Wow. I like my restaurants. I like my sporting events. I like my concerts, although, concerts weren't happening there yet. But I did go to a hockey game.
Did you?
I went to a Florida Panthers hockey game, and there was like 1,500 people is all they allow in there. Now, there were elements of that were nice. There's no beer lines. But, man, they were watching you keeping the mask up, and I even got I even got chastised for not having it high enough up on my nose.
Yeah.
Even though there's nobody sitting around me.
I've taken in a few concerts that have gone on. Like I went up to Nashville the end of December for Old Crow Medicine Show at the Ryman, no less, and it was great to see that open. Although we had to be socially distanced and wear masks, but
that's what I fear is that. Yes, they're going to open those things, but we're going to be a long ways away from it being more than 25%, then more than 50%. Then maybe we'll get to 100%, but they'll still have the mask rule.
Yeah.
Because for some reason, these politicians are very dismissive about the mask. Oh, wear the damn mask. Yeah. What's the big deal? Don't you care about your neighbor? The mask isn't for you, it's for them.
Yeah.
But that is a destruction of individual liberty and individual choice. We're supposed to go out and make our own decisions about how we treat others and how we protect ourselves.
Yeah. And what are they going to do once we get our vaccinations? I have my second one coming up in 2 weeks. After that, I assume I can't get it. I can't give it. So why should I have to wear a mask anywhere?
Right. And as far as protecting others, well, they now are able to get it or not get it. So everybody now has the individual choice to get it or not get it. So we shouldn't have to be concerned about others anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so my view is all rules and restrictions should go away once the vaccine is available to all, which we're very close to.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
But you see what they're setting up. They're already setting up and saying, well, you've got the variants coming. So they're going to say, well, no, because of the potential variants.
Yeah, yeah.
We got to continue to do this.
Like old Rosanna Dana used to say, it's always something.
Well, and speaking of our subject, I mean, clearly, I think you would say that the left is using COVID to implement socialist policies, progressive policies that could have never been implemented but for COVID.
That's right. They do that no matter what the emergency is, and they do it even if there isn't an emergency, if they can get away with it. Everything is a crisis to them, and every moment that they can seize a little extra power is an opportunity for them, and they rarely miss one.
And that's why you can't fully trust what they say about COVID, because they are naturally incentivized to keep this at play, to buy them time to implement as many of these progressive policies as they can. And, you know, these $2,000 check type of handouts and the unemployment benefits and so on, you're already seeing now cities setting up these programs where we're just going to allocate X number of dollars to give to monthly checks to the poor.
Yeah, exactly. It just never ends. Every chance they get, they will use it as an opportunity to accumulate additional power in the hands of the state. It's their modus operandi, and it's their end objective.
Yeah. So we're going to talk today about whether Jesus was a socialist, and we're recording, by the way. So Michael, our producer, will pick this up wherever he sees appropriate. But you know, one thought I have as far as what was Jesus a socialist is that I think one of your points is that progressives and socialists would like to say that because they want to co-opt the churches. So, you know, one thing they have trouble getting, the left has trouble getting, is churchgoers.
Yeah.
But if you can get churchgoers to believe that Jesus was a socialist, well, then now you've got the churchgoers. Yeah. And it seems to me that actually the left already has the churches to a large extent.
Yeah, considerably so, unfortunately. But the socialists rarely tell you what their true objective is. They wrap everything in velvet. They tell you that socialism is caring and sharing and giving and relieving people of burdensome responsibilities and making life better for them and so forth. They never tell you that the other side of the coin, actually there's several other sides to it. One is it doesn't work, but secondarily, they can't do what they want to do without imposing it upon people. I often say that if it's voluntary, it's not socialism. If you listen to a socialist, he's got a laundry list of not helpful tips for better living, but programs and policies he wants to mandate and force upon other people. But that's a side they rarely tell you. They don't tell you they want to run your life. They just say, we want to give you stuff.
Well, one piece of evidence of that is you don't hear them talking about charity.
Yeah.
They never talk about charities.
That's right. In fact, and studies have shown time and again that people of the left don't give very much of their own resources to charities. They think that that's a responsibility of government, and they often actually denigrate private people who give privately for private assistance through charitable means. They'd much prefer the state do that. But I often tell people, hey, if Jesus came back today and spoke to an audience of 1,000 people, and let's suppose he said at one point, okay, tell me, what did you do for the poor? If you answered, well, I voted for the politicians who said they'd take care of that, I don't think he'd be impressed. I think he would say, wait a minute, that's not my message. You empowered the state. You wanted it to rob Peter to pay Paul. I told you to do it. I didn't tell you to tell the politicians to do it.
It's a tough question, but I mean, what would your theory be as to why they prefer the state to do this than to encourage? Because there's two things they could advocate for: advocate for the state doing this, or advocate for charities doing this.
Yeah, it's an intellectual cop-out, I think, in many cases. They think, well, if the state does it, well, then we'll know it's being done. Then we can be assured it'll be done, which, of course, you can't be assured of that. The state told us that it should educate kids, and yet we know that millions of them fall through the cracks of government schools every day of the week. But people like the idea that, well, but the state, we know who that is. So if we give it the responsibility, we'll at least know who's trying to do it. Whereas if you say the private sector, we don't know who that is. What if they don't do it? But the whole notion that you and I as private citizens don't care and are not compassionate and won't help others in need, but yet as voters will know to vote for politicians who will have that compassion is really, I think, a ludicrous assumption.
Yeah, and what you lose is the government becomes obviously a monopoly in providing these things. And we know that monopolies usually don't do very well. In fact, in general, we're all supposed to be opposed to monopolies.
Yeah.
Charities, on the other hand, they actually compete with each other.
Yeah.
And good charities rise to the top and bad charities go away.
That's right. Whereas failed government programs usually get more funding. The government is not Mother Teresa. And it has its own set of flaws. And politicians who wind up these programs to supposedly help people, they will frequently use these programs as ways to buy votes. They will cynically use programs to put people into lives of dependency upon them, and then seek their votes as a reward. And I don't really think that we want a society where people have their decisions made for them, where their lives are pretty much run by politicians who have bought them with other people's money.
Yeah, that's another way of looking at it. It's just a way for them to maintain power, to be in power, to be in leadership. It's the kings that used to give breadcrumbs to the people to keep them content. I mean, it still happens today in places like Saudi Arabia. You know, in order to keep the kingdom in place, you got to give some crumbs to the people to keep them just satisfied enough that they don't rebel. And that's what they're doing. They're redistributing crumbs to the people.
And of course, the question we should all be asking then is, well, who does that empower? It doesn't empower the recipients who are now dependent upon politicians, whose every judgment and opinion will be swayed by what they feel they have to say and do in order to keep the goodies flowing. It ends up empowering the politicians. And so a lot of socialists know that very, very well. They know that if they can crank up these programs and they happen to be the ones in government, they will be empowered. They can buy the public with the public's own money.
And the more you put the government in charge of, the more risk of corruption there is.
Absolutely.
Right? Don't we see that in dozens of countries around, let's just take locally, South and Central America.
We do, and we see it throughout history. In fact, one of the most corrupting, if not the most corrupting motivation in all of history is the lust for power, the desire to be in charge, to push people around, to tell them what to do, to take their stuff, to live their lives for them. And anybody who has 5 minutes of knowledge in history should understand that that's one of the most important lessons we can possibly learn, that even good people will typically be corrupted by power. You can take the best people, give them some power, and in almost every case, that will make them less good people and maybe even evil people with time.
Yeah. And the last thing I'd say about that is supposedly we all agree that money does not buy happiness. Yet they have an obsession with money.
Yeah, exactly. They tell us that we do, that people who believe in freedom and free markets, that we're greedy and selfish and obsessed with money. And yet, what is it that they're always trying to take and redistribute? It's money. Those of us of the other persuasion, we're often talking about happiness coming from lots of other sources, such as love of your neighbor and your family and pursuit of your goals in life, ambitions, and your entrepreneurship and so forth. Happiness comes from many ways of fulfillment, but to a socialist, it's money from the state, and somehow that's all you need, and you'll be happy.
Yeah, I got this line from your article from Thomas Sowell. I've never understood why it is greed to want to keep the money you have earned, but not greed to want to take somebody else's money.
Yeah, exactly. And I think socialists, even though they're the ones who scream the loudest about greed, they're actually the greediest people on the planet because they're the ones always grasping for other people's money. I mean, that ought to be the very definition of greed, to focus on money and not even your own so much, but your focus on other people's money.
So when we talk about whether Jesus was a socialist, let's define terms briefly before we get into that. Define what a socialist is and also what a progressive is if you consider that to be anything different than a socialist.
Yeah, your second question, Jim, I'll just say from the outset that there's so little difference, you can hardly even find it. I don't know of a progressive who isn't a socialist, although he might say he's not, but he tends to support the very same things. Maybe socialists are, they just want a little more of it and a little faster, but at bottom, there's really not a whole lot of difference. I know that a lot of young people in particular are told by their teachers, by their university professors, that socialism is caring, sharing, and giving. But there's more of that under capitalism than there ever is under socialism. Even when you look at foreign aid, government to government foreign aid, it's invariably from the more capitalist countries to the more socialist countries. They're always the recipients. They're not the ones giving stuff away because they haven't created it in the first place. I think socialism is best defined as the concentration of power in the hands of the state. Then the question is, for what purpose or purposes? For the purpose of redistribution of wealth, or the central planning of an economy, or the appropriation of your property into the hands of the government. Usually it's a good measure of all three, but it comes down to one word: force. It's not a special request. It's not just a hint. It's not a hope. It's an agenda for the implementation of political force through the concentration of power.
Now, you define it that way. A socialist would say, what? You're wrong. That's not what it is. And they would say it's what?
Well, I can tell you what they'd be thinking. They would be thinking, oh, we can't let him get away with that, or people will be on to what we're after. So they then say that, oh, no, we're not for that. We're like your grandma who just wants to have you over for dinner and give you free stuff. But that's childish. That's first grade stuff. We ought to be adults and be able to look at these things as they really are, not as some slick marketers want us to think they are. So the socialists will object to that definition, but it's because they object to reality. I mean, don't they? They don't even like the fact that you and I are sovereign individuals with rights to property, and that we're so different one from another that no two of us is unique. They want to collectivize us and homogenize us in some kind of a communal blender and then follow their orders. So they don't like any of the real definitions, the honest definitions of what they're all about, but that's their problem, not mine.
So before we dive into was in fact Jesus a socialist or not, let's talk about how important is that question, and is that a real question that's circulating out there, and is there a real risk that society is going to be convinced that Jesus was a socialist?
Yeah, there is a great risk, and there are a lot of people who have been deceived into thinking that he was a socialist already. The reason, and I explain this in the book, that this is important is, and it's not just important, by the way, for Christians. It ought to be important for anybody who's interested in fact, in truth. I mean, this was a genuine historical figure. What did he have to say? Why should anybody get away with making up stuff that he never said? So I think for the sake of truth, we all ought to know, well, what did he really say? Then we can decide in an informed manner whether to accept his message. And the fact is, there's not a line from Jesus recorded anywhere in the New Testament in which he endorsed anything that's remotely connected to the ethics or the economics of socialism. That's pretty important because every day we're all grappling with, what kind of a life and society do we want to live in? What do we want the role of government to be? I mean, it's important for us to know all perspectives, especially that of a man who was of such historic significance.
Why don't you shoot down for us what they would throw out as one or two of their best lines from the New Testament that they say supports the fact that Jesus is a socialist, or was.
Okay, well, quite often the socialists will say, but what about when he chased the moneylenders from the temple? Doesn't that indicate that he was against rich people or capitalist people? That's often thrown up. And I'd like to point out, but wait a minute, consider the context. He drove the moneylenders or money changers from the temple, from God's house. He never chased them from a marketplace or from a bank. And he did so with a very clear message that this is not an appropriate place for what you're doing. If you had shown up at a funeral with a kazoo and started singing "Happy Days Are Here Again," I think Jesus and just about anybody else would tell you to leave. That doesn't mean that they don't like kazoos. It just means that's not for this time and place. Oftentimes they say, yeah, but he said to a rich ruler that it's more difficult for a rich man to enter heaven than it is for a camel to go through an eye of a needle. So doesn't that suggest he doesn't like riches or rich people or systems that create wealth? What Jesus was saying in that regard was keep your priorities in order. And remember that with wealth, and he would say this also with regard to power, which is what socialists want, with wealth you have temptations that often cause people to go astray, to begin to worship the wealth, to let the wealth run them instead of the other way around. So he was not anti-wealth. He just said, don't let it tempt you. I mean, we see it every day, don't we? People who've come upon sudden great wealth in Hollywood or athletics or you name it. A lot of them can't handle it. Some can, but Jesus would say, be careful. Temptations, don't let them drag you down.
And what about on taxes?
You never find a case in the New Testament where Jesus says anything like, we have to raise taxes for this or that purpose, or let's ask the government to do that for us. Never. He tells the story or the parable of the Good Samaritan. Amazingly, I've been confronted in public forums from people who say, well, what about the Good Samaritan? Doesn't that argue for government programs for the poor? And I have to point out, wait a minute, what happened to the Good Samaritan story? The Samaritan is walking along a road. He comes upon a man in great need who's been beaten and robbed. The Samaritan doesn't say to the man, oh, well, go see your social worker. Or maybe there's a Roman government program for you. Or see you later. No, the reason he's a good Samaritan is he chooses of his own free will and with his own resources to help the man. If he had done any of those other things, if he had said, oh, the government will take care of it, we would know him today as the good-for-nothing Samaritan.
Yeah, I mean, that's a story about private charity, essentially, at the most basic level.
Yeah, Jesus was interested in what was in your heart. And it's no indication of what's in your heart if you just simply say, well, let's have somebody else, maybe the politicians, let them do it. I mean, if that's an indication of what's in your heart, it's probably not a good thing. It's not what you think it is.
And what about the render unto Caesar what is Caesar's parable?
Yeah, this is a very clever response on the part of Jesus to the Pharisees. They were trying to trick him into saying something that they could use with the Romans and say, look, he's calling for tax evasion. So Jesus' response when they asked him, well, what do we do with this coin? Can we pay our taxes with it? And it's got an image of Caesar on it. Is it his? Jesus essentially said, well, if it is his, then give it to him. Socialists like to say, well, that somehow justifies anything that any Caesar wants to take from anybody, and no matter what he wants to use the money for. How ridiculous. How out of context that interpretation could possibly be. What Jesus said actually leaves it up to us to decide what belongs to Caesar and what doesn't. He just says, if it's Caesar's, render it to him. He doesn't say it is Caesar's, and he doesn't certainly say that all that Caesar has to do is claim that it's his, and it's his no matter how much he wants or what he spends it for.
And he's preaching to people who are under the authoritarian rule of the Romans. I mean, that's what they were all worked up about, right?
That's right. And he didn't come to encourage a physical revolution against the Romans. He made that plain. He said, I'm not here for that purpose. He said, I'm here because I'm concerned about your soul. I'm concerned about your sins and that they be forgiven and that you do something to earn that forgiveness. So I know a lot of Israelites at the time were disappointed. They wanted a Messiah who would come in on with guns blazing. But he didn't justify Roman rule, but he just said it was not his purpose to generate a physical revolution, but rather a spiritual one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they were opposing, but the people, basically, broadly speaking, were opposing an authoritarian government, the same one socialists would have us implement.
Exactly. It was a socialist government by that point, in the sense that it held command over the economy, was passing out favors and preventing private entrepreneurship in many cases. It was corrupt to the core. I mean, we have had endless examples in history of socialist governments of one kind or another. They never create wealth. They have no theory of wealth. They just think it's there for the plucking, for them to swipe and redistribute. And then ultimately, when it proves to be a disaster, then something akin to capitalism has to come along and save it. You know, the Britons, Great Britain went socialist after World War II. 30 years of that, it was a basket case, and Margaret Thatcher had to undo it. And over and over and over again around the world, socialism flops into tyranny and poverty, and then capitalism is resorted to bail it out.
A couple more things on Jesus. I'm going to read this parable. So I read your article in advance of the interview, and I wasn't aware of this one, but I'm no biblical scholar. But I thought it was so good that I want to read it and then get your thoughts on it. So this was a parable that is in Matthew. A landowner offers a wage to attract workers for a day of urgent work picking grapes. Near the end of the day, he realizes he has to quickly hire more, and to get them, he offers an hour of work, what he previously had offered to pay the first workers for the whole day. When one of those who worked all day complained, the landowner answered, "I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius?" What is that? The
Roman coin. Mm-hmm.
Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same amount as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous?
Yeah, this is known as the parable of the workers in the vineyard, and it's told by Jesus himself. And I see it as a endorsement of things like voluntary contract. After all, the workers agreed with the employer freely that they would be paid a certain amount for a certain amount of work. And that's how the employer ultimately defends his action. He says, look, I gave each of you what I promised, what you agreed to be paid. It's my money. So it's an endorsement of voluntary contract, private property, and probably even supply and demand in a sense.
Yeah.
Because I think late in the day, when you only have an hour left of light and the employer still needed to get the grapes in, he had to pay a premium to get those workers. And so he did. That's
the ultimate free market principle.
Yeah, supply and demand, we free market economists, we know what that is. But socialists, I'm convinced that supply and demand to them means the people demand and the government supplies. That's as deep as their understanding of supply and demand is.
So what do you think Jesus's point of this parable was?
Well, I think he was saying, I mean, there's a spiritual context to this too. But whenever Jesus told a parable, there typically were some real life, day-to-day, even economic implications and meanings, as well as spiritual content. And certainly the economic content is to defend such things as honesty, voluntary contract, private property, delivering what you promised, and both on the employer side and the employee side. And not raising a fuss about something you agreed to that was honestly adhered to.
Yeah, it's funny because I think that if you were to ask people, especially a socialist, but probably just about anybody, and they said that, Jesus was presented with this scenario where the worker who had toiled all day in the hot sun now learns that the guy who's going to toil for only an hour as the sun goes down is going to get paid the same as what he just got paid for the last 8 hours of work. And they go to Jesus and say, Jesus, what should this employer do? 4 out of 5 people probably say, oh, I'm sure Jesus told the employer that you need to compensate that other worker at the same level that you just compensated this guy that you just hired for an hour.
Yeah. No, it's a hard lesson to learn, but all of us need to learn that you should be held accountable to the decisions you make, to the contracts you agreed to in the first place. Don't change the terms later just because you don't like what somebody else's terms were. You're held to the terms you agreed to. And,
we see this in real life. There's been a couple stories about actors in movies where after the movie's shot or at some point, the lead actor learns that the lead actress was not paid as much as he was.
Yeah.
And then there's all this to do about, oh my gosh, how horrible is that is. Obviously it's sexist, et cetera. And the next thing you know, the guy's given half of what he got paid to her. Now, it's voluntary. So I think you and I have to support that, his voluntary decision to do that. But the whole shaming, et cetera, of it, and and more importantly, the woman or the man, it can happen in either direction, but complaining about it. Yeah. Right. That's the shame. Jesus would be telling that woman, you should not be complaining about the fact that you voluntarily agreed to serve in this movie for that X price because you later learned that somebody else got paid more.
Yeah, exactly. And can you imagine how chaotic economic life would be if we were not held to the contract terms to which we agreed? If instead we changed them later based upon, well, I don't, I feel differently now, or I don't like what that guy got, or any endless other things that would allow you then to simply rewrite the rules that you agreed to. That would be chaos. Yeah.
It's an obsession with equality, which really their new term is equity, because that's really what they want, which is more of an affirmative action standpoint. But it's just an obsession with this equalness. I'm like, why do we want things to be equal? Life is more exciting and interesting when everybody is unique and different. And how the hell can everybody be equal anyway, since we're all born unique?
Yeah.
Yet they want everything to be equal.
Yeah, it's again, that's why it's important to note that socialism in its strictest and fullest sense is anti-human, because it seeks to make people what they're not. People are not equal. We should be equal before the law, but that's very different from equality in possessions or incomes, earnings, or even happiness. Those are derived from other things like talent and our willingness to work. And if you equalized everybody's wealth tonight, so that no matter what your contributions were to the marketplace, you were earning the same as everybody else, you would have inequality by noon tomorrow, because some people would save it and some people would spend it. I mean, so trying to make people equal can only be attempted at the point of a gun, and it's not going to work out in any event. So why bother to try? Let people rip and do their thing, and as long as they do no harm to other people, let them be the unique individuals that their talents and ambitions make them out to be.
So you have a line that I normally agree with, but I'm getting concerned about. And it says that economic entrepreneurs are a boon to society. Political entrepreneurs are another animal entirely. I've always said that, when they talk about wealth disparity, they keep on to talk about wealth disparity. Well, there's a ton of wealth disparity in America right now because we've got some mega billionaires.
Yeah.
And so, but my concern is the poor. How are the poor doing? I don't begrudge people becoming multimillionaires or even billionaires, as long as the poor are doing okay. And frankly, the poor in America, relative to virtually every country out there, are doing extremely well.
Yeah, they are. And yeah, I agree. I don't begrudge the wealthy simply because of their wealth, with the exception of those whose wealth is derived either partly or completely by special privileges that they've gotten from the government. I mean, the government can rig the game, and does all the time, unfortunately, by conveying special privileges or subsidies upon the well-connected or this or that interest group. And I think as believers in freedom, we should always oppose that. What we should want is a fair field and no favor. Let people go as far as their talents can take them, not their political connections.
Right. So, but my concern now about these economic entrepreneurs and multi billionaires, I mean, we're getting close to having a trillionaire, I think. I mean, it's getting so up that their power is starting to concern me, because they're now in the communications business and the media business, and you have a few tech billionaires that are able to control what people see, hear, read.
Yeah, that concerns me too. But I don't think, I think an even worse problem would be to get the government in the business of censorship or telling companies what they can or cannot say. I would look for every possible artificial barrier that we may have erected that stifles competition to the big guys, that cements their position in the marketplace and makes it tough for upstarts and newcomers to challenge them. And government is doing that every day. But in a genuinely free market where you can't get privileges from the government, then anybody who misbehaves once they get big is just inviting newcomers to take away their market share. And with a little time, that'll happen.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about this? I think it's Texas that's proposed a law that would prohibit, companies like a Twitter from censoring speech.
Well, I'm sympathetic on the one hand to the end objective, but I'm very skeptical that having government in that business will be handled properly. So often people think, well, let's just wind up a new government program and we'll fix that problem. But I'm too jaundiced from all the times in the past when we've done that, only to find that the new government program gets taken over by the existing big guys and turned to their advantage, and it ends up achieving the opposite of what was originally intended. That happens all the time. So let's make for a free market and keep the government out of it as much as possible and let competition do its job. Every time we raise taxes, even if it's just on the rich, we rig the market, because higher taxes are more easily paid by the already well-connected, the already existing big guy, than they are by the newcomer, the upstart, the guy starting out of his garage. So the more you socialize an economy, the more rigid you make it, and the tougher it is for new companies to challenge the big guys.
Yeah, well, it's a great point. And I think one way to think about it, I know Biden's saying, oh, no taxes below anybody making $400,000.
Yeah.
But as you do your projections, when you decide whether or not to open up this restaurant or this business or what have you, you have to determine what your expenses are going to be, your projected revenue, and then how much of your profit has to be paid in taxes.
Yeah.
So even if it's 400,000, that's going to affect a small business owner in his decision making as to what level of risk to take. The more of that his profit that has to go to the government, the riskier his venture becomes, and the less likely he is to pursue it.
Exactly. You know more economics than most members of Congress, Jim. You're exactly right. And keep in mind, there's another side of this too. Why do we assume that if the government takes the money, and it's only from those who make a lot, that it will somehow prove to be more beneficial than if we left it in the pockets of those who earned it? I look at what the federal government spends people's money on, and I say, I don't want to give that outfit another nickel of anybody's money. I don't care how much they make. I wouldn't give that crowd in Washington another penny. They waste so much money, and they involve America in foreign entanglements, and they blow it at home on bureaucracy, and they buy votes cynically in the democratic process. Why would you want to give that outfit another dime, no matter where it came from?
As far as the level of power that we're giving these billionaires and the connection between them and becoming progressives or socialists after they've achieved that level of wealth. I mean, it seems like if you were to poll them, they would come out strongly on the progressive side of things. So do you have an explanation as to why it is that that billionaires who took advantage of the free market to get to where they are then wind up to be socialists?
It's a sad commentary, Jim, on the extent to which we've been saturated in society with statism, worship of the state. I mean, if you're making $1 billion, chances are pretty good your friends are among the politically active. You probably know every politician. They're the ones that are in your social circle. They're the ones who are dangling all kinds of opportunities for limelight and notoriety and power and maybe privilege and subsidies and so forth. So you tend to get drawn like a moth to flame to those kinds of things that that you find attractive. And power is attractive, especially to those who have power within their own major companies. It really takes a person of solid character to not only build an enterprise, but then once he has it, to realize that there are some sound principles he should not forsake. That just because you've got yours now is no reason to support a system that would prevent somebody else from building up their wealth as well.
How much of you think it could be a simple kind of payoff that basically, you get Jeff Bezos, you'll see these Antifa riders and so on, and his name is on the signs sometimes. I mean, they're coming for him. That's what happens when there's revolutions, is the rich get the hell out of the country because the socialists are coming for their money. Yeah. And you'll see Bezos's name on there, yet he is supporting these groups. So is it a bribe, essentially? Is it a payoff that he thinks that he's doing, that he's perhaps buying his peace by pretending to be on their side?
Well, at the very least, it's feeding the alligator, hoping that he'll eat you last. It's not a very good long-term perspective, and it's a little gutless, frankly. But look at it from their standpoint. I would guess what goes on in the minds of people like Jeff Bezos is, I might stand up and denounce this climate of political correctness, cancel culture, statism, socialism, what have you. I could go on the nightly news every night and talk about why it's evil. But then they're going to come after me big time, and I'll be, I don't want to get so beat up. So I'll just be quiet about it, maybe throw them a few crumbs, make them think I'm not so much against them. That's a very cowardly approach, but the world is full of cowards.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be the approach they're taking. When you've got a couple $100 billion to peel off a couple billion to buy your security,
you never miss it
as a payoff. Okay, last thing to cover, because it was something that I think that I disagree with you on, and I want to get your thoughts on. So this is from your article, as you're talking about whether Jesus is a socialist, etc. I had always understood Jesus's message to be that the most important decision a person would make in his earthly lifetime was to accept or reject him as savior. So, a couple thoughts on that. I mean, if you don't accept him, and that means that you're not going to heaven, you're going to hell because you didn't accept him. I mean, that sounds pretty coercive to me. So I'll let you respond to that, and then I got one other question about that line.
Okay. Yeah, I do hear that argument sometimes. I think we have to understand that these are the rules of the game, and the creator does have the right to determine those rules. We have the same thing when it comes to, say, a cliff. You know ahead of time, the rule is if you jump off the cliff and you haven't got a parachute, you're going to hit bottom, and that'll be the end of you. I'm sorry, we may not want it to be that way, but we're the clay, he's the potter. Those are the rules. You know them in advance. You're told. In fact, he even gave you a way out by sending a savior. Then all he asks to avoid what you deserve is to accept the savior as in fact that. So I see this, you hear a lot of people say, look, God doesn't do or say all the things I wish he would, or that I would if I were him. Therefore, I just don't want to believe in him. But that's a pretty dangerous and narcissistic view. I mean, you're not the creator.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, what about this question? I mean, and again, I'm no biblical scholar, though I have read it. But I mean, is there really words? Does Jesus really say himself to the people, you must accept me as the Son of God or as a Savior in order to be saved? Or is that really things that were really said as they were creating the Catholic or the Christian church? Yeah. And that was the message of the church, but not necessarily specifically by Jesus himself.
No, he made it very plain. He made it plain that he was, in fact, sent by the Father, that the Father and the Holy Spirit and he, Jesus, are one, and that no one cometh unto the Father except through him. Now, I know a lot of human beings will say, well, that sounds arrogant, therefore I'm not going to believe it. You're in uncharted or difficult waters if you reject what God says simply because you find it inconvenient.
But hold on a second. Let's think about Jesus and the type of person that he was, right? And all the parables and all the lessons of life, very Buddhist type message. You really think that Jesus would take the position that if you don't believe and that I'm the Son of God, there's no saving you? Or does that sound something more like what the people who are setting up a church that are trying to convince people to come to their church would say?
Well, there are multiple witnesses who record that Jesus himself said many times that he was here to preach a message of salvation, and that meant you must accept him as your Savior. Again,
hold on a second. Let me just stop you right there. It's one thing for him to say, "I'm sent here for this purpose.
Yeah,
I'm the Son of God," etc. But does he ever flat out say, "And if you don't agree with it, if you don't believe in me, you're going to hell"?
Well, not in precisely that wording, but that is the meaning of what he said. He never said, for instance, but I'm just one of many saviors. There are a whole lot of them out there. You can believe in whichever one you want. Or I'm just a good teacher, that's all, which would make him out to be a liar then, because if a good teacher wouldn't lie. And he said much more than just good moral things. He actually said that I am the way, the truth, and the life. So you have to decide, am I so human that I can't accept anything but unless I'm at the center of the universe? Or might this, in fact, be a mandate from the Creator? We can't put our standards up against him and say, Jesus, you got to comport with what I'd like before I'll accept you. That's like the clay telling the potter how to shape him, or telling the potter what his business is.
Yeah, I guess I'm just challenging whether there really is that direct of a quote where it's very, very clear that he is saying, not only am I this, but if you don't believe in me, you're screwed.
The message of salvation is, look, you're all sinners to begin with. You are going to hell, but I've come to earth as a way to save you. And all I ask is that you accept that there is a God and that I was sent by him, and that I am in earthly form that God himself.
And for those who were never exposed, to Christianity, what happens to them?
I think the Bible makes it plain that God will judge their hearts, that especially in those who lived before Christ's coming, if they were evil in their essence and committing evil acts, they deserve hell, and probably all of the things being equal, that's where they'll end up. But God is ultimately the judge based upon what's in your heart. And I don't believe that he will say the fact that you never heard the word Jesus means you're going to hell. I think he's going to look in your heart and say, look, the message didn't quite get to you, but you acted as if it had.
But if you did get the message, didn't accept it, doesn't matter whether you spend your entire life feeding the poor in a Mother Teresa-like existence, you're screwed.
Yeah, you can't bribe God with works. God made it plain that you can't just say, well, I'm not going to agree with everything. I'm just going to do a few things and that'll keep you happy. That's not the way it works.
But he did give us free minds and free thinking, and certainly would want to encourage that. And we've learned a lot in the 2,000 years since Jesus was here, a lot about science and so on, and certainly know that what supposedly happened with Jesus is not scientifically possible. I don't
know that that's proven at all. You mean that he?
Well, you got the miracles.
Oh, okay.
Miracles, and rising from the dead, and being born of a virgin, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, by our standards, of human standards, all that seems impossible. But we're talking God here. We're not talking your local mad scientist. Yeah,
but it's also was at a time when, I don't know. I guess maybe I could say those type of things were more believable, because we thought that the earth was the center of everything. We thought that we were pretty important to God. Mm-hmm. At that time, it was more. Right now, as based on what we know about the universe and evolution and Big Bang, and ultimately this tiny little rock out in this galaxy and this solar system and this one particular sun is twirling around, we don't seem near as important as we did 2,000 years ago.
And yet, even today, scientists increasingly are observing that the odds that life as we know it would have come about entirely from nothing. That the coincidences of the distance from the Earth that the moon is, and so many other things that are part of the mysteries of life. The odds that all those things would come together and produce life on their own from nothing. I mean, that's more of a leap of faith, I think, and many scientists are of this view now, than it is that there was a creator who brought it into being.
Yeah. No,
I don't think that something comes from nothing.
Right. But they would also say that the odds that there is not intelligent life out there is very low. That it's highly probable there are other Earths out there.
The Bible's silent on that. Bible doesn't say the Bible doesn't say, and there is life only on Earth. So I leave open that possibility that there may be life elsewhere too, but it's not, of course, proven yet.
Thank you again to Lawrence Reed. Check out his book, Was Jesus a Socialist? It's available on Amazon. Thank you to our producer, Michael Parker. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of The Hidden Truth Show.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.